according to Mark Twain, worrying is like paying a bill that we don't owe or which isn't due yet or something like that. Mark Twain, he's the kind of a guy you think of him as being down to earth, kind of guy who says it like it is, kind of a guy who's fairly wise. But in this respect, I think he's not wise. I think in this respect, he's merely reflecting a cultural bias. And I can't blame him for that. We all reflect the biases that have been put into us by our culture. It's a bit much to expect that we could somehow escape doing that. So in my view, Mark Twain really is articulating a cultural bias. The thing about worrying, or the thing about anxiety, is that on one level it's very understandable. We all think we understand it. We can see what it involves. We can see that it involves anticipating disastrous outcomes when the fact of the matter is we don't even know if there's going to be a disastrous outcome or not. So what we're really doing is assuming that there is going to be, and then feeling bad on account of our assumption. So we can see that process going on. So we can say, but you don't need to be worrying about it. Sure, it may never happen. And that kind of thing. And that's our normal response to anxiety. It may never happen. So what the hell are you going through hell about? Or going through a really hard time at least. Now the articulation of this particular viewpoint doesn't do anyone any good. It doesn't get us anywhere. If you happen to be suffering from anxiety and someone comes up with something like this, it makes you feel worse, not better, because you feel like a fool. You're bad enough to be suffering without it being the case that you're creating your own suffering when you didn't have to. Because then you don't even deserve any sympathy for suffering because you did it yourself. So instead of sympathy, we get judgment, condemnation. And although most of us would swear blind that we don't go around judging and looking down on people with anxiety, it's a cultural thing. Our very therapies are manifestations of not just our misunderstanding of anxiety, but our dismissal of it as a stupid thing that should be easily fixed. But it isn't a stupid thing that should be easily fixed. Now, for one thing, we ought to know that because we never have fixed it yet, despite all our attitude. We've never come anywhere close to remedying anxiety. Anywhere close. And the number of people suffering from clinical anxiety goes up and up every year. So culturally, we're not in a good position to act as if we know what the answer is, because we obviously don't. And far from being something that can be easily understood and dismissed with superficial responses or superficial therapies, this whole thing of anxiety goes really, really deep. It goes as deep as anything can go deep. It can tell us a lot if we look into it. Which we don't look into it. That's the whole point. That's why we make it superficial. Because we're accepting surface level impressions and thinking there can't be anything more to it than that. We really aren't curious about anxiety. And when we go off on this whole biological route of talking about changes in the body, mechanisms, changes in the vagus nerve is the most recent one. It used to be all about adrenaline and cortisone or whatever, and I can't even remember, but it used to be drilled into us all this information, type A personalities, type B, all this kind of stuff. And it's a kind of biological fright or flight thing that's got out of hand, and it all sounds so convincing. You can just imagine some plausible kind of guy sitting there explaining it away in that intolerable fashion that people have when they try to explain things away. Now, they don't go on about adrenaline so much. It's all the vagus nerve. And all the big wigs are going on about that. Stuff you can do for your vagus nerve. And without wanting to sound too dismissive of it, it should really be clear that anxiety, the understanding of anxiety and becoming liberated from the particular grip that anxiety can have on us, has nothing to do with some sort of biological thing that we can do to the body. It's not like fixing a car. It's not a physiological thing. It's not a mechanical thing. It goes much, much deeper than that. It would be nice if it's just a matter of lifting the bonnet and tinkering around with a few things under the bonnet. But that's just us, yet again, refusing to look any deeper. It's as if this systematic refusal to look deeply into things is some kind of virtue, and we're proud of it. It's as if it's done us good in the past, always doing us good in the present, and it isn't. This kind of stubborn superficiality it's a curse. It's a plague upon our heads. So just to get that straight, it isn't a good thing. To smugly talk about the answer is this, and the answer is that. How the hell can we be so obnoxiously arrogant as to come out with things like that when really we're in the beginnings of a mental health pandemic, without wanting to sound too doomy about it. Anxiety and depression are affecting more and more people every year. We're not on top of it. Our antidepressants aren't working. Our CBT isn't working. And whatever we discover next to do in a similar superficial mechanical fashion isn't going to work either. Life does not respond to superficial manipulations, or manipulations are based on a superficial way of understanding things. Well, it does respond, but it doesn't respond in a helpful way. Well, it doesn't respond in a pleasant way for us. Not the way we want it to anyway. It might be helpful in the long run if we can actually learn something. So that's all very well as a preamble. But what is if the superficial stuff is just that superficial stuff, okay, we'll forget about it. Let's move on to the other stuff. So what is the real stuff, the deep stuff, the stuff that can really help? That's what you want to know. It's easy to slag off things after all. So one thing we can say is that if we explain human beings by saying that we have two modes, being mode and doing mode, which is fairly, that's not a dichotomy, that's unfamiliar to us really. We can say that anxiety is all about doing mode, certainly not about being mode. So doing mode rests upon the unspoken assumption that the good thing will happen as a result of us doing something correctly. That everything rests upon our ability to do the thing correctly. So it's all about doing the thing, obviously. Obviously, doing mode is about doing the thing. I shouldn't even say that, really. It's about successful control. That is our core assumption. Good things will happen when we control successfully. That's the core assumption of Western civilization, really. Hasn't worked out too well for us so far, but never mind. So, when we believe that we can control successfully, that we can be efficient doers, efficient, purposeful agents, then we become confident. But more than this, we become arrogant in an unfounded way, because it is all just bullshit, and no one ever became happy or fulfilled as a result of successful controlling. Controlling is a manifestation of fear, so we might as well say by obeying fear efficiently enough will bring us to a good place and make everything be okay. So that's what we're really saying. If there was no fear, there would be no controlling, not in the psychological realm of things. Instead, it would be like the Buddhist idea of the lion who faces all directions. The lion with many heads, the Ashokan lion. He's just looking in every direction and he's not afraid of what might come. It's not that he's able to destroy or beat or fight whatever comes. He's just not afraid of it. Doesn't need to fight it. He has no fear. The Ashokan lion looks out fearlessly. That's Pema Chodron's thing when she talks about fearlessness. Fearlessness and controlling don't belong on the same page. You can't have them on the same page. And fearlessness is not something that we can do. It's a quality of our being. So that's the other side of things that we haven't talked about yet. So if our entire way of looking at things rests upon the unspoken assumption that all good things come to he or she or whatever controls successfully, then this is also the key to understanding anxiety, because anxiety is that secret doubt, that secret fear that becomes less secret and less hidden as time goes on, that we can't control successfully, that we're not able to do successfully. So it's kind of like a little worm that's got into the apple and it's eating it away from the inside. So even when we all appears to be well and the apple is shiny, like a shiny supermarket apple, on the outside, that worm is on the inside eating away. And it gets to the point where that groundless euphoria of thinking we can control our way out of any situation starts to be less plausible to us. We doubt it because it's not true. So of course we doubt it. It simply couldn't be. It's ridiculous even to think that that could be true. So what do? Well, we just carry on and we pass over into this other realm, which is, even though we may not feel it, we react it. We pretend as if we are still confident, and we pretend as if we still have this belief in our ability to control. And to a certain extent, we can pretend that, and we can believe our own pretense. So it's not fully fledged anxiety yet, but the worm of anxiety is there and it's working away. So the next stage is where not only do we no longer feel the confidence, we can't even pretend either. The pretending gets frayed at the edges. We can't carry it off anymore. So we're forced to confront the fact that we no longer believe we can control successfully, no matter what it is, a little thing or a bad thing. We get nervous that we won't be able to do it. We get worried that we won't be able to do it. Now, one thing about anxiety is we get anxious very often about unimportant things. So then it's like we say, oh, it's irrational. The hell is irrational? That's more bullshit. The thing is, if only we could look into it a tiny bit deeper, we'd realize it's not about the thing that we're really worried. We're worried about our lack of ability to control, full stop. And if I can't control in small things, that's just as bad as if I can't control in big things, because I can't control. And my very being, my conception of myself, my conception of the world, is all based on the fact that I can successfully control, that I am an efficacious controller. So what I'm really starting to see here is that control isn't something that I can do. I'm starting to see my own powerlessness in this way. And that's the frightening thing. The things that I control are trivial. That doesn't really matter. What matters is that I can control them. That's what I want to know, that I can control the things, whatever the hell they are, whatever those damn things could be. So we're forced to confront this. And once we do, our entire way of life is under threat, because it's all based on purposeful doing. And if I can no longer believe in my ability to correctly do, that brings my life to a halt. It shuts all the doors to me. It closes down all the avenues. Because purposeful doing is what it's all built on. That's all I know. And there is a particular horror that attaches to us when we see someone who doubts their causal efficiency in this way. It's like, oh no, you must never doubt that. It's like being in a religion and someone saying, I don't know if I really believe in this God business. You know, it's like, oh no, you must never doubt. And it's exactly the same. We don't like to go too deep into anxiety because we don't want to confront the secret fear that we all have, that maybe controlling we aren't really possessed of this ability to control our way out of situations. Really. Only in superficial ways, maybe. We don't want to confront that, so we just don't go there. So that's the stigma of suffering from anxiety. People don't want to know the message that's in anxiety, is that our entire culture, which is based on purposeful doing, is based on a false premise, because that is not where it's at. Purposeful doing is not where it's at. Being is where it's at. There's no controlling needed for being, because we already are. We don't need to arrange things so that we can be. We can't. That's like planning to stop planning, or it's like controlling so we don't have to control anymore. That's a little paradox, or a big paradox. So the key thing is in our way of life, in our civilization, is that if we do the thing correctly, good things will happen. And that formula allows us to run our society on it, our technologies, our whole way of life. It's all based on that. Do the crappy thing, because the good thing's going to happen when you do it. And then if it doesn't happen, well, it's your fault because you didn't do it properly. That goes across the board, whether it's therapy, doing base therapy, or whether it's just getting on in life and doing whatever it is we're supposed to do in life. I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't do things, or that purposefulness is wrong, just that it isn't the core thing. It's a secondary thing. The core thing is being. Unless you can be who you are, not be someone else's idea of you, or be thoughts and construct of you, or unless you can be, there's nothing you can do that can ever make anything okay. Good things will never happen. It can't unless you can be, because unless you can be, there's no one for them to happen to, because you have to be first. Being is primary. Now, it doesn't suit us to see that at all, because we're all into the striving and the controlling, and thereby it's all of us running in the hamster wheel, stretching out our hands saying, I want the good stuff, I want the good stuff. And we think if we run fast enough, we'll get it. That's what makes the world go round. It would be a very different type of a world if if the good thing was already there, and the being in the being is the good thing. Being is the good thing. There is nothing else. Being, what more do you want than being? So the other paradigm, the being paradigm, is not just where there's no controlling, or we don't have to control, or it's not crucially important to control. It's kind of like everything's already there. Everything's already okay. We've already got the money in the bank. So I wake up in the morning and think, oh, I've got to go to work, do the 9 to 5. I suddenly realize the money's already in the bank. The money's already in the bank. Now, of course, it doesn't really work that in paid employment. I don't think any employer in the world is going to like the idea of giving you the money in advance so you don't have to do the work. But still, that's how reality functions. Doesn't mean that reality wants you to lie on the floor and just wait for good things to happen, because they won't. You just die eventually and your muscles waste away. But what it does mean is that when we're talking in the psychological realm of things, our activity, I'm not talking about activities that are necessary for biological maintenance. I'm talking about activities that are there to augment the self, augment the ego. So all of our real activities aren't practical. They're there to validate ourselves, enhance our false artificial sense of ourselves, and that's why we do it. That's why we strive so much. We're trying to shore up the idea that we have of ourselves, and that idea needs shoring up because it's a big bunch of rubbish, really. So anxiety points us in the direction of seeing that we have based everything on controlling, and controlling doesn't work. So instead of thinking, as we as a culture do think, that we must be possible to do something to restore this faith in the controlling, which is so important, and that's never going to work because it isn't so important. What helps is to see that there is a whole other world which we've never really had a glimpse of, that has absolutely nothing to do with doing or controlling at all. But in order to appreciate this whole other world, we have to no longer identify so much with the mind's construct of us, which is based on doing. Actually, the construct of us, this self-image, is a doing. It is a doing. That's why we have to keep doing, because we have to keep doing it. We can't ever stop doing it. Otherwise, it won't be there. So the thinking mind is always doing, and it's what it's doing is producing us. And we think we have to keep on doing because we do, if we are the self that we think we are.